You're prepared. I'm prepared. 14 years of work. I'm supposed to prepare you.
So because you're here,
Hello everyone, my name is Emerson Damiano and I'm a Tyler Prize Student Ambassador. I'm a sophomore studying environmental studies and French with a passion for ocean-related research. Before we begin, I'd like to ask everyone to please silence their cell phones just so we can have the opportunity to listen to these amazing panelists without any distractions. Today, I feel beyond honored and delighted to introduce Julia Martin-Lefebvre. She is the chair of the Tyler Prize and a prominent environmentalist. Julia was the former Director General of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN. Yep. She was the head of the University of Peace, a UN-mandated university providing education and training for peace and conflict. Julia also served as the Executive Director of Leadership for Environment and Development, as well as the Executive Director for the International Council for Science. She's been given many awards for her work, including the American Association for the Advancement of Science Award for International Cooperation in Science. Please join me in welcoming Julia Martin-Lefebvre.
Merci Emerson. Because she's a French major, we're now going to continue in French, or if you prefer my mother tongue, Hungarian. Does anybody speak Hungarian here? Okay, I've frightened you already. So thank you very much. That's kind of embarrassing, I have to say. And I just want to explain one thing. So I think you could just describe me the next time, do it in one sentence. I've been a very privileged chief conductor for organizations that need to work in harmony with each other, just like at the orchestra. I love music, so that's what I've done, and I'm continuing helping organizations, and I'm very excited to be here. So I just want to say that this is the first time that we've organized an intergenerational conversation at a Tyler Prize event. And while many of our 81 laureates who've been named for the last since the first year of our 50 years have probably been young middle-aged or middle-aged and older middle-aged, I think that I know for a fact, because I do know, I'm old enough to know quite a few of them, that they really were interested and committed to learn from younger generations. Mm-hmm. So, and in fact, what we have just done, and you'll see this on our website, we have included this as a part of the criteria for selecting laureates. Of course, they have to do great science. Mm-hmm. And remember, the title of this prize is Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement. So we're very proud if they write many scientific papers, but it also has to make a difference. And I know that those of you who are in the younger generation are getting impatient. I had some good talks with several of you, and we do need to make a difference, and it has to be based on good science, and people have to listen. So this is just to tell you that we are totally serious about having a conversation such as the one we'll have later on today. So I want to really thank our two laureates. I guess you're representing one part of the intergenerational, along with me, Daniel and Rashid, and you have already proved to us that you're interested in talking to people who are going to take over from us. Yeah. And then thanks to you, Shijay, Tiana, Evan, and Ray for being in this first, but certainly not the last intergenerational conversation about, we really have to have this so that we know how to face the future together. And you can blame my generation too, of course, but after you finish blaming us, let's just hold hands and go for it together. So now I'm very, very proud to introduce Leah Thomas, known in this country as Green Girl Leah, right? I want to start to translate that into French and have you be known everywhere. So Leah is a celebrated environmentalist whose recent book is called The Intersectional Environmentalist, and then you have a tagline, which I think is I'm going to go get this book right after I finish with this session, so that underneath the title is How to Dismantle Systems of Oppression to Protect People and Planet. Yeah. So we're so pleased to have you, and now I'm going to sit down and listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, yay, okay, I can hear myself. Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming today. I'm super excited to be here. As was mentioned, my name is Leah Thomas. I'm an environmental justice advocate, really passionate about creating resources at the intersection of climate and culture, because I believe it's going to take all of us to save the planet, and that information has to be as accessible as possible. And, yeah.
Yes, that's good.
And today, I'm so excited because we're celebrating, as you can see, with that beautiful 50, with all the nature elements, 50 years of the Tyler Prize, and we're here with some really incredible people. So without further ado, I'd love for you all to introduce yourselves with about a one-liner, and then we'll get into it. You can start.
Oh, so I'm not prepared, perhaps, but I have been 45 years in this business, and I should be able to dredge up a one-liner. I'm Daniel Poli. I'm a professor of fisheries and marine biology at University of British Columbia. I've worked in lots of countries. I grew up in Europe, and I worked in Asia, lived in the Philippines a long, long time. No one-liner, by the way. And I now work in America, in Canada, and I've been honored. I'm honored to have received this prize. There will be no one-liner. This prize, and I will participate in the discussion. But you caught me. This is flat-footed. No one-liner. That's it.
Lovely, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure being here. So my name is Ray. I'm from Tanzania, and I am the Africa coordinator for Roots and Shoots. So one line I would say, I'm just a compassionate citizen. So we'll talk more on our discussion a bit later.
Hello everyone, my name is Shia Bastida. I come from the Otomi Toltec indigenous community in central Mexico, and I've lived in New York for the past 8 years. I'm a climate justice activist, student, and shaper of the future.
Shaper of the future. Oh, that's good. I'm Rashid Sumaila, and I like to say I'm West African, Ghana, Nigeria, and I'm at UBC. I've gone all over the world. People say the whole world is my workplace. So that tells you. And a one-liner, that's a tough one. Maybe I should give you the one from my grandfather. What guides me is that our granddad used to tell us to walk on earth as if it feels pain. And I think that really summarizes all that we're all doing here. If you can walk on earth as if it feels pain, then you know how to relate to nature. You know how to relate to fellow human beings. And so that's the one-liner for me.
Hi everyone, my name is Tiana Shaw Wakeman. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Environmental Justice Program Lead with a wonderful organization located in Limerick Park, California called Black Women for Wellness. We are committed to the health and well-being of Black women and girls, and we advocate for this. One of the methods primarily is reproductive justice and also environmental justice. And I'd say my one-liner is probably a Southern gal on a mission.
Yeah, that's good.
Automation.
Assignment there, but I won't. Okay, hey, aloha, kako. Hey everyone, my name is Evan Weber. I'm here today, I believe, because I'm one of the co-founders of the Sunrise Movement, which is the largest U.S. youth climate justice movement in the United States, fighting for a Green New Deal. But I spend most of my time now organizing across race and class in Hawaii, in the town of Kailua, where I'm from, to fight for a future where all people can live free and healthy on a sustainable planet.
Yeah, good.
Well, I would just like to say that we are amongst greatness here, so give it up for them. Everybody is just so cool in their own ways. So let's get into it. There's often conversations about individual change versus systems change, or science versus action. And sometimes these are posed as kind of competing ideals, but I think that they can coexist. But I'd like to ask our panel of experts, do we need more science, or do we need more action, or do we need both? And I'll start with Shie, and anyone can chime in.
Oh, well, I think that has been probably the hardest question to answer because you don't want people to feel disempowered, but we do want people to understand that we need to change systems. And I think one of the stories that I can share with you, for example, is in New York City, we passed the Climate and Leadership Community Protection Act, which is a policy that, just like Justice 40, aims to give 40% of funds to frontline communities. But the issue is that there were no definitions for what a frontline community was. There were no definitions for what does it feel like to be the bearer of pollution, the bearer of heat waves. What does it look like for your community to be impacted by flooding, etc. So I would say a lot of the times it is about translation into sectors. How do we translate from my worldview, which is Earth does feel pain, Earth does feel love. Our communities need to be grounded in a reciprocal system where we give back to Mother Earth. But how does that make sense with policy? And how does that make sense with people who are operating these laws? So in New York City, there was a climate justice working group convened to define what a frontline community was. They came out with definitions that not only took into consideration the environmental impacts that a community feels, like days over 90 degrees, how susceptible it is to flooding, the air pollution that the community feels, the rates of asthma, but also the legacy of redlining in that community, the level of poverty in that community, the energy bills, how much do people have to pay for their energy. And those two factors were combined to come out with a definition of what it means to be in the front lines, but also then in the front lines of receiving those solutions. And this wasn't possible if the members of that climate justice working group weren't community members. And it wouldn't be possible if we didn't have people writing policy that made sense for New York. And if there weren't people, for example, fighting the $1 billion investment that wanted to change the character of Sunset Park in New York. So I think it's about the translation into our sectors, because systems are made of individuals, and we do have the power to walk into this new paradigm shift. One of the definitions for a paradigm shift is that the issue is so big that I cannot possibly know all the solutions. I cannot possibly know all the pathways. But I know that there are people who are experts in each one of these. So I think seeing ourselves as part of the system, as part of this interconnected ecosystem, is the way to go, and know that our individual actions are part of a system change.
Here's a one-liner. I propose that we, for most of the environmental problem we have, we have the science. It exists. The problem is that it is not applied. Activities, involvement, policies is where we need scientists need to have scientists, because scientists that do only science are kind of not really useful as before, because we have the science. The science of climate change, the science of reasonable agriculture, the science of reasonable fisheries is in my opinion, established. What we need is a scientist to dare to go outside of the ivory tower and say so. So the scientist as citizen who says things is what we need, because up to now, the scientists, having produced this science, say, pick it up, but the point is they don't know to pick it up. We have to explain what has been produced. And so the problem is not that we don't have the science, but we don't have the scientists in the public sphere that are acting and involving themselves. That's what I think.
I agree. I think that in large part we have the solutions, and I say collectively have the solutions to solve the climate crisis and bring about real environmental justice. And I think all of us are going to have a role to play in that, and that role is going to look different, but it needs to be there, and we all need to take action. But with that being said, and I think this was brought up a bit, I do think that the mainstream kind of environmental conversation and the conversation among elected officials often gets so bogged down in purely thinking about carbon reduction that we miss the intersectional components of the issues that we're all thinking about. And I think we sometimes miss that our society's obsession with fossil fuels has also created so many other problems, and that all of these are being more so felt by communities of color, the developing South, and lower income individuals, and that solutions have to come from those experiencing the most harm, and that when we think about science, we have to think in terms of an expansive definition that includes qualitative data, that includes lived experiences, that includes community-based participatory research, which is what I get to do at my organization. And that requires a lot of trust between scientific communities and communities that have been long harmed. Because I know the community that I serve in South LA, when they hear a scientist coming in and asking them questions, they have a couple questions of their own based on things that we've experienced.
Yeah.
So I think we do have a lot of the solutions, and I ask, my call to everyone is to really dig into the problems that we're solving and recognize that carbon is a big part of it, but so is the mass extinction and the reality that we're living in a world that's saturated with toxic chemicals, a lot of which are petrochemical based, and that's creating public health problems. And that when we all work together from our various parts of sectors, students, I started my activism as a student, we have a lot of power, just saying. Organizers, I love being an organizer, teachers, scientists from both the quote-unquote ivory tower and scientists that are really doing on-the-ground research and grassroots research as well. We all have a role to play, and we all do need to take action.
I think this is very interesting, which brings me to the kind of work that we do at Roots and Shoots. I've had, Dr. Pauly say about, scientists who have to go there and do something. I think this would come to lack of, that urge to do something. So I think all that is needed is compassion. And which brings me back to a certain perspective. When we hear about, deforestation, one thing that I could experience is that, especially from Africa, or the country that I'm from, people are not just, cutting down trees because it's fun to do so. People are on an urge for survival. So when you say things like you should stop using, biomass fuel, it means they cannot cook. It means they cannot keep their families warm. So it is important to bring this rich knowledge into a way that we think we need more compassionate people, because there's been a sense that people maybe simply do not care. I mean, it just feels like, going in the wind. So the work that, at least, which I'd like to take a bite at it, is the Roots and Shoot methodology and approach to this. It's what we refer to as a KCA model: knowledge, compassion, and action. People only care about, the things they know, and so this is where knowledge comes. And knowledge of understanding of their own environment, understanding of their own, capabilities as individuals, challenges, and opportunities. And then when you understand so much, which means you click with what you care about in your context, and then that will drive your compassion to actually do some kind of action because you are more aware then. So if there's one thing I could say, I think we need more compassionate citizens. And this, whether you're a politician, whether you're an engineer or a scientist, if you are driven by compassion, I think you'll have an urge to do good.
Yeah, they've said it all, isn't it? Can I say something? Maybe I can. Yeah, to answer your question directly, science or advocacy, from all the answers, I think you can summarize that. We need action. We have enough information to take action, but we need science, and I hear it. And you need a different type of science. And you mentioned interdisciplinarity. You need to co-create. You need partnership, and it's beginning to show up. I mean, the Research Council in Canada actually funds people for partnership projects, where it is academics, it is government people, it is industry, it is NGOs coming together, take a problem and deal with it. So that's the kind of science I think we need, integrative science that can lead us to come up with the things you said here. And to your point, Ray, this has led me, maybe I have some supporters here, I've started actually advocating for universal basic income. Because a lot of the people hanging on the last fish, they have no food to eat. And they tell me, I go to Africa and say, Rashid, you're talking about 5-10 years. What will they eat tomorrow? And I tell them, so if you take all and they eat today, what will they eat tomorrow? And I say, tomorrow will take care of itself, right? They are so desperate. So collectively, I think we can do it. We can provide, we're calculating how much it will cost per country to do it. And we have the money to do it if we have the guts to I don't want to say tax in the U.S. You give them negative subsidies. You give them negative subsidies and get the money to do this job, right? So thank you. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a great segue to the last thing that I would sort of add to all the other commentary, which I agreed with. Which, yeah, Ray, I like your knowledge, compassion, action framework. I think I might add to it and say knowledge, compassion, action, and power. To me, we don't actually necessarily need more science or more action on their own, but we actually need power to get things done. And power can look like a lot of things. It can look like what it looks like in a lot of the United States and first world right now, which is, people who look a lot like me but older, oppressing everyone else, and using the levers of capital and the state to do so. Or it can look kind of like if everybody in this room turned together and kind of amassed our resources and figured out what we had and how we could work together and build community. And just even from the few people I know around here, I know people in this room that are connected to clean energy and universities and institutions and people that can organize their friends and their neighbors, and together we can actually do a lot. Action on its own actually can be just as disempowering as looking at a scientific report and starting to freak out. We gotta get together, and we also need to be smart and strategic and figure out what resources exist in our own communities. And sometimes it's just that you've got an auntie who's willing to make food for the meeting. It can be as simple as that. So,
Good stuff.
Thank you all so much for your thoughtful answers. Next, we're going to be moving to barriers to entry. So this can be interpreted a lot of different ways, but for example, in the United States specifically, Black and Indigenous-led environmental justice organizations receive less than 5% of philanthropic funding in the environmental space. Just for context, so wealth at times is a barrier to entry and to scaling solutions. In addition to that, I would argue that the environmental movement has a communications issue and might need a bit of a makeover, where we have a lot of the science, as you all have explained, but everyday people still don't know what's happening in their air and water. So what are some barriers to entry that you all have seen? And any thoughts about how the environmental movement can update our communications to get more people involved? It's a twofer.
I don't want to start.
I can start since I finished. I'm like on a roll here. I feel great. Yeah, so totally agree with your hot take and assessment. A lot of what we tried to do at Sunrise Movement with introducing sort of the Green New Deal into the national conversation wasn't just to kind of reframe the policy and political debate, which we did, which is awesome, but also to give ordinary people a better way to relate to environmental issues. So for a long time, the environmental movement here in the US, and I would argue in Europe and other places, was really, really focused on the science and parts per million in the atmosphere and, species that are endangered. And like, I love fish and like birds and stuff just as much as the next guy, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't work for everybody. And the polar bears are cute, but the polar bears, like was said, aren't necessarily related to like where the next meal is coming from. And so, the things that most people wake up every day thinking about are what food they're going to put on the table, whether they have a job that gives them health care, whether they have a community that they can breathe the air in, they can drink the water in, that they have good food that doesn't poison them and their children, whether they have a house over their heads. And yeah, like you said, the climate crisis is this all-encompassing thing. we've built so much of our society around fossil fuels and unsustainable development that in order to really tackle it, we have to really tackle all of those things. We have to redo our housing. We have to redo our communities and our transportation. We have to, redo our food system, and that is an incredible challenge. But society ain't that great for a lot of people as it is. So it's also an incredible opportunity. And with the Green New Deal, we try to embrace that opportunity, and particularly for young people, for communities of color, for working people. I think that those kinds of conversations can be a lot better entry point into sort of environmentalism and the climate crisis.
For my part, I've worked mainly in the global south. I've lived a long time in the Philippines, and the institute where I worked had a global mission, intertropical. So I worked in Oceania, in South America, in Africa. And the big problem that I met is availability of information that you find in every university accessible here in the US. The accessibility of journal literature, accessibility of information that allows them to work. Because the fishery scientists and that are supposed to shape, I look at it from the fisheries point of view, to shape the fisheries policy, they are cut off the source of information about their discipline because the journal are expensive, because publishing in the journal is enormously expensive. So I have tried to address the problem of information access. And this information access can be overcome as a problem by making information available, by dredging lots of information and putting it in a format that people can use. And so if you want to know about fisheries in the world, you can consult Sea Around Us and find all the stuff that FAO should make available and makes available, but in a form that people cannot find out and digest. So that is limited because it is one profession, it is one thing, but I talked with Julia a few minutes ago, and I saw the need, or she expressed the need to do the same thing for forestry, because the forestry information available that do concern people, because people need wood and trees and stuff, the forestry information is available is provided by government to the FAO that makes it available in form of a database about the forest of the world. And this database of forests is false. The information in there are false because the government care only about commercial forest or plantation or something, but the forest that people need, where they can access resource, are ignored or are chopped down and not reported. And so information is, because we have a society that where there is a distribution of labor, I picked up an issue that I can resolve, and I picked up that issue of making information available. The other thing is skills. People that work where science is an import, and it is so, because science is not being smart, is not having smart people in one's culture. Science is a social activity, and it involves lots of people. And if you have only one or two scientists in a country or in a province, you don't have science, because science is collective activity. And so you address the skill question. Or there are lots of people that are supposed to do in fisheries, to do fisheries assessment, how much fish is there in the sea, but they can't do it. They can't do it because the method that are in a textbook that they have learned, if they have studied in the US or in Europe, are made for studying cod, and they are made for studying herring, which you can age properly and which you can assess using hydroacoustic techniques and so on. But these techniques don't work in the tropics, so what are they supposed to do? And then the scientists, what I did, was translate this method that were suitable for use in the North for use in the Global South. And I did it in a form of calculated program. And I mentioned yesterday software that you could use on Apple IIs and the computer all the time, and then they are used. So, and in the process, also creating method that are kind of simplified but work. So that is the part where I contradict myself, because I just said the science is there. Well, the science wasn't there. The science that you can use in the tropics, in a data poor situation, that science had to be invented in part, and there are fields where it has to be invented. In lots of tropical countries, the biodiversity is actually not well covered by the local people, because they don't get to do research, because in universities people are supposed to teach in the Global South. They are not supposed to do research. The colleagues that we train very often in Canada or somewhere, they go back to their country. They don't get to do research. All they do is teaching from the books that I say are not appropriate. So there is a job translating science, adapting it for use in all countries, developing shortcut or developing shortcut or appropriate method for use in the tropics, and that is what I've done, and make information available, really freely available, not that you have to register and pay a little bit, freely available. And it is very difficult, and that's the reason why it's also very difficult to get funding for that, because if funding were available to pass information in the South, we wouldn't have a problem of inequity with the North and the South. So there we are. Thank you.
Can I?
After you.
So I would say at the global level, we have also a debt problem that we don't talk about enough, because the reason why Global South countries cannot finance a transition to a clean energy future, to support their communities, to develop in the way that they want to develop, not with neoliberalistic policies of industry coming in. And basically, for example, in Mexico, most of the mines are owned by Canadian companies. The wealth doesn't stay here, and ecosystems are completely destroyed. We are talking about the biggest financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, convincing countries to get into these systems of partnerships where they have to pay back in oil, they have to pay back in forests, they have to pay back with agriculture, with products that make our communities be export-oriented, and then we don't have any capacity to grow. When we're talking about the $100 billion a year that the Global North is giving to the Global South, first of all, we don't even have that money yet, but they want to do it as loans. So more payment, more debt. Countries are actually asking for debt to be canceled. If you want us to act upon our climate commitments that we make to the United Nations, etc., to our own people, we need to cancel our debt. And this change in an economic system is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be welcomed by the countries like the United States, the European Union, that want to keep sourcing their fund from Global South nations. And so when we are advocating for this type of barriers of entry, it's just because I need to pay back my debt, so I can't fund any community projects. I can't fund any, Jakarta has to move, Indonesia has to move its capital, Jakarta. How are they going to finance that? Because of sea level rise. And so I think there are the little things that we need to advocate for, but then the big systemic shifts, like the economic global system, that hasn't worked. For example, in Ecuador, the Ecuadorian government did a deal with the UN saying, if you give me $4 billion, I will not open any of my jungle to resource extraction, to oil extraction. Germany and another country said, okay, we'll help you so that you can raise the money so that you don't have to get your income by selling oil. They raised less than $100 million out of $4 billion. And so China came in and said, I'm going to help you with your debt. Here's $8 billion, but you have to pay me back in oil. So now Ecuador is not with the IMF of the World Bank, but now with China saying, we have to pay you the $8 billion back in oil. And what is that going to do to indigenous communities? What is that going to do to the Amazon rainforest? We are in a system that is lending and indebting, and that happens in the United States as well. Why are people so stressed because of college debt, because of health debt, because of all of these things are not letting us be our best selves, who we are, what we want to build, because we're so focused on not falling apart. We're so focused on survival, and that is because of the mechanism that has been created for us. And when we talk about that psychological aspect of it, we're also tricked into thinking that the world is coming to an end by all of these papers that say the apocalypse is coming. But what about all of the communities that have already seen their rainforests destroyed? What about the communities that already survived colonialism, that are still living in new types of it? What about the communities that were displaced because of that mining company? These communities are rebuilding, and their history already went through their ends of the world. Pakistan, 33 million people displaced by flooding. That already ended their view of the world. And so communities are actually developing survival strategies that have surpassed the end, and they're rebuilding. And that is a new position that we need to have in our minds. We're not going towards, the downhill. We're already past the downhill because communities already saw that end. So now we're rebuilding, and we need to do it strategically. Fossil fuel companies have lobbyists, they have lawyers, they have power, they have money. We need to be just as smart, if not smarter. We need to start suing everybody. We need to start, calling out the Mexican president. He's very criticized, but he actually said no to the World Bank, or I don't know if it was the IMF or the World Bank, giving billions of dollars to Mexico. And he said no, because I don't want to be tied to that. So there are things that our countries need to be implementing in the global south to not let the United States keep interfering with the economic processes that have led us to not be able to be developed how we want to be. So, yeah.
Yeah, let me very quickly say something. Number one, barriers to entry, that's a very good question, as you can see from the discussions. and really, we need to take all these barriers down because it's very costly. It's very costly. We cannot solve our global problem when most of our brains are not being deployed. I've told this to African countries anytime I go. Until you give African women, girls, the same opportunity to the boys, half of the brain of Africa is sleeping. You got to deploy this, and this applies all over.
It's the better half, to be clear.
Yeah. You can say more than half, actually. Thank you for that. Yeah. So this is crucial, right? And actually, evidence is piling up. And this I heard from the World Economic Forum. One of their speakers said, you know what, there's evidence that talent is distributed equally all over the world. Talent is equally in all groups. We have the talent. The thing which is not distributed all over the world is opportunity, right? So we keep out all these groups and we are losing big time. We got to break them down. You need universal basic income. I'm coming back to it. So the issues you raise, why did I come to this? At the UN, anytime you bring a policy, developing country, people say, come on, what do we do with our poor people? Subsidies. I was forced to think about this in the forum at the WTO. You see, anything we say, take out harmful subsidies, say, come on, our people depend on this fish. And then I say, you know what, let's give everybody basic income. Then they can use that as an excuse that to release the world, and we can lift off to a higher level, right? So that is the point. Let's break all the barriers.
I think I cannot agree more with the previous contributors. I think there is two kind of perspectives from how I see it into barriers to entry. There's the physical barriers, the economic architecture. But there's this other barrier, it's a virtual barrier, apathy. The tendency to not care. A good story about something that actually happened with me is by training, I'm an architect. And so we've been having a big conversation around, you've heard about water stress, and then when I tried to dig a little bit more, I actually realized that an average person would actually use at least 300 liters of water a day, like fresh quality drinking water. And then this was like, wow, so what is my own contribution? So I realized there's actually more information. Like if you actually go to take a shower with your Bluetooth speaker on, you use even more water. So the action was like, okay, so now I have to, at a very individual level, try to make a difference. And that would be like reduce the amounts of water I use, trying to be more conscious into what is happening around me. So I think that also has been perpetuated by the role that science. We have the great science. I mean, it was amazing hearing from our laureates yesterday. But I think it is also more important communication in terms of packaging communication. Because people are not homogeneous. People are different. So people have different triggers. So we need a kind of communication that can bring the message in a way that people can actually understand and consume, and that will trigger that compassionate action and to make a difference. So I think.
Thank you.
And I think, and I'll be brief, I know we're short on time. I strongly believe, when it comes to the messaging component, that when we take action and care for our fellow person on this world, especially as it relates to bringing about environmental justice, it is one of the best ways that we can show people we might never know that we love them. It truly is. And so I think that we spend so much time in this work, and I have a long list of barriers I can discuss and talk about. We personally, and working for one of those organizations that gets so little funding as you shared, I spend so much time getting rid of the bad, spend so much time fighting these false solutions that are often put forward by people that are just trying to keep the status quo going because they like it. We spend so much time trying to get rid of this bad, trying to reframe ideas, trying to explain our perspectives, show our lived experiences, talk about our pain so that other people care. So much time doing that we don't get the time to actually envision and lean into a world that we are trying to create, to spend time imagining the beautiful future where everybody does have access to clean air, clean water, thriving neighborhoods, opportunity, education, no debt, all of these things. And when we are, all of us here, are part of dismantling this white supremacist, capitalist, colonialist system, we are in this transformative opportunity to just overwhelm the world with love. And that, I think, is part of the messaging that gets lost.
Thank you. That's nice.
That was so beautifully said, and I think you all kind of touched on the concept of world building and radical imagination, which I love. Have you all heard the term radical imagination? Makes me feel sparkly. So radical imagination is essentially not only understanding the problems and the systems that you want to dismantle, that's a first step, but being able to radically imagine and world build and do thought exercises of the world that you want to create. So it's really important to have that North Star within our movements, because then it prevents burnout, it prevents apathy, and I think that doom and gloom is not as sustainable as hope. And having that hope and world building and radically imagining together is something that each of you all are doing, so I'm just so honored to be here. But to get into, thank you. But to get into our last question before the audience Q&A, I was reading this lovely article by Audre Lorde called Lessons of the 60s that I recommend everyone read. And essentially, she's discussing how during the civil rights movement in the United States, there was a lot of conversation about which theory of change was the best and the most effective. And that's something we kind of talked about earlier when we were talking about systems change versus individual action, or action versus academia, which one's better? And essentially, she concluded that instead of fighting those theories of change, what could it look like if we respected people's different theories of change and knew that it took all of us to create the world that we want to see? So, segue into a kind of hot button issue, especially with the release of a new film called How to Blow Up a Pipeline and getting different environmental stories out there. What is the role of civil disobedience as a means of achieving action? things that we can learn, some lessons from the 60s and other movements, especially because we wouldn't have Earth Day if we didn't have civil disobedience, because they adopted and appropriated many of the actions of the civil rights movement before them to create the Environmental Protection Agency, to create the environmental policy that we have today. So, what is the role of civil disobedience as a means of achieving action?
I grew up in Europe, and I didn't know much about my African American family because my father is African American, and I came in '69 here in May, and this is just the month where my cousin and a group of other black nationalists, was the term, took over Cornell University. So that was my introduction to the U.S. and to my American family. You may recall this. He had a big afro and he had the munition belt. And, it was over Time magazine, Newsweek, and Paris Match in France. It was quite something, and he was being followed by. I went to Little Rock with him and stuff. He was followed by the FBI. They had the little Falcon, Black Falcon. And then he had a group that was lots of weapons. I have never seen so many weapons outside of the German army. I learned what they were doing, and basically what my impression was that you had two groups, theory of change. You had the people who really raised hell, and the people who settled. Malcolm X perhaps raising hell, and Martin Luther King settling. And we have that exactly now also. We have Greenpeace. They raise hell everywhere they can, and God bless them because it's needed, but they don't close deal with anybody. In fact, I was one time at a meeting of Greenpeace in Japan, and there was one of the bosses telling you are not closing deal, you're raising hell. Because if we close deal, we lose our reputation. This is other people, WWF and other people, they can be seen as poodles, but they are the one closing deals. And I think this dynamic has to continue. You have people who break the door and people who walk through it when it is open. And I was recently asked a few years ago at a meeting in London, and I met some of the heads of Greenpeace, and they told me that I had been recruited. Somebody wanted to recruit me into Greenpeace, and they said, no, don't get into Greenpeace. We want you to raise hell outside, because if you are a member of Greenpeace, then you have to do it. But if you do it outside, it's better. So I think I'm very serious about that. I think that we need people who raise hell, and we need people who close deals. And some of us find what we best can do. And we need both. And the theory of change is that you need several theories of change operating at the same time.
That's great. Maybe I can quickly add to that. That's wonderful. I don't have such a nice, colorful story to start with, like Daniel. That is beautiful. Yeah, I agree with all that you said. And the only thing is that we need to be careful. And I think, Daniel, you mentioned that yesterday, right? When you have two competing things that are aiming to do, the key thing is to watch out, so that one doesn't
Undermine the other.
or you consume all the resources, right? Because then you're stuck in something. So that's something to watch. We need to be careful with that. Yeah. You want to go? Joe, listen to you.
Yeah, I can. Do I need this? What's going on? Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. So I've been arrested a number of times. Most of which my mother is proud of me for. But yeah, I mean, I'm pro civil disobedience, I guess, if that's the question. No, I mean, to be a little bit more Yeah, I've been known both as a hellraiser and a deal maker, and I think we do need both of those things. For Sunrise, I was our national political director for a number of years, so working at the highest levels of politics with the Biden administration, members of Congress, et cetera, trying to actually pass legislation that would actually help communities and our planet. And we definitely wouldn't have even gotten the piecemeal legislation that we got without all of the hell raising that we did. I think that my agitation would be that the civil disobedience that we've seen in the United States thus far is really not much to write home about, and that we can think about bigger forms of collective disruption that will actually achieve the scale of change that we actually need, which would go beyond, tax credits to clean energy companies, which would achieve things like universal basic income, which would achieve things like universal health care, which would achieve things like true decarbonization and indigenous sovereignty and the things that we actually need to have a healthy and just society. And we have a lot to learn from our peers in other parts of the world, many of which are represented on this panel, which I'm really grateful for. But yeah, I think, Sunrise Movement, one of the kind of funniest moments of my work there was on the other side of the pandemic, we did a sit-in at the White House, and a political reporter was walking by and sort of tweeted out a thing that said, Segway tours have started and arrest me protests are back at the White House. Nature is healing. So the tactics that we use can actually be a bit performative at times. And civil disobedience, when you actually unpack what that means, it means that you are choosing to disobey and non-cooperate with the structures of society. And I think that if we actually interrogated that much more, we would come up at different sets of tactics that might look like tax strikes, where we all stop paying our taxes until certain demands are achieved. Where we stop going to work, where we stop participating in institutions of society until society really shifts. And that's going to require a higher degree of, that kind of disruption will require a higher degree of organization and collective action. So just wanted to add that.
Okay.
No.
And to that, I'm going to bring in a global perspective as well, because I've been wanting to get arrested many times, but I can't because I have a Mexican passport, right? And I have a visa, and I could get deported if ever I got arrested. And so we have to think of the fact that different people have different abilities to disobey, right? And Mexico last year was the most dangerous country for environmental defenders. And a group of youth in Bangladesh organized a beach cleanup, and the government told them that they couldn't do it because it showed the faults of the system that even let the beach get dirty. So even something that we would look at and say, this is such a good community action of cleaning a beach, the government is saying that is actually pointing fingers towards how I don't work. So being mindful, I think of the abilities of different populations to disobey differently. And also I think the fact that in the global north, you have the right to protest, you have the right to organize, you have the right to unionize. Using these tactics for the rest of the world, because you can ask your own institutions that are, the mining companies that are in my country, to stop from here as well. And we need that help, because you can go out there, you can mobilize in gigantic numbers in different ways without putting your life at risk as much as people in my country are. And so I think that's the global south, global north responsibility of mobilizing because you can. Mobilizing because you are also safeguarding your democracy, and mobilizing because we need those types of support for our own countries to try to emulate a type of disobedience that actually doesn't put us at risk, but is still effective enough to push boundaries. And there's so many different, I love the, people sometimes laugh when we say like change the curriculums, but if you knew that I didn't learn about climate until college, scientifically, like there's some things that we really can't change at the institutional level that are forms of protests, and using the legal system, international legal system, the International Court of Justice, bringing all of these countries that have allowed their populations to be harmed by companies, all of these things are forms of protest, and we need to open that definition and use them and have that compassion for other populations who can't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think from where I come from, the concept of civil disobedience, I think it's a bit different. In some countries, especially in Africa, I mean, you can hardly go head to hand with, like the police, because it's not gonna end well. And
Neither does it here.
But then I think it is more, like aggressive, I would say. And so I think the approach that me personally, that I think I've come to appreciate, and I invite every one of you, of course, to be a Roots and Shoots family, is the sense of understanding like proactiveness by taking responsibility at a very individual level. And we have seen these biases. For instance, if I had a bias on some kind of understanding, maybe just a misunderstanding about a certain concept about nature, perhaps, and if I go ahead and become, let's say, an executive in a company, chances are the organization would have that enshadowment of my perceptions. And so this goes down to individual perceptions becoming institutional. And it goes, when you become government and you are in positions of power, it becomes, the institutional kind of perception. So I think I would like to invite everyone to take that responsibility, even though it is important to be reactive, collectively. But you as a person, what responsibility do you have? Because like a famous quote by our founder, Jengodo, is, I'd like to finish with that, of course, is every individual matters. Every individual has a role to play, and every individual can make a difference, I think.
You know what? Just very quickly, my two colleagues here, I like all that you've said. It's beautiful, it's good. But I just want to say some of the best movement we've had happen in developing countries in terms of civil disobedience. Apartheid South Africa, the South Africans did it. So I get your point, but the action has to also be on the ground. And we can do it, but with a lot of support from outside, because apartheid was also supported. I think, Daniel, did you go on demonstration in London, to support apartheid? So I'm just saying that there is risk there, and I'm not playing with that, but we have to really open up the space locally to make these things really happen. So that's...
I'll share again briefly. I started off by saying that my one-liner is a Southern girl on a mission, or a Southern gal on a mission, as I say. Or I'll adjust and say a Southern gal on a mission who learns from my ancestors. So I think it is all of our civic duty, our civic responsibility to disrupt. And I think that, as we've shared at many points today, there are many different levers we all have at our disposal to be able to push, and that's one of them. With that asterisk of, again, being someone who works for a Black-led organization based in South Los Angeles, for some people, unfortunately, our existence in this world to others is disobedient. And that means that the way that we have to operate in the world is different. And I think that asterisk is very important as we are coming up with different tactics. But even with that asterisk, one of those tactics is and always will be civic disobedience.
I think we have time for one audience question, perhaps.
Just one?
Might have someone teed up with a mic. Maybe 3 questions.
Maybe 3.
There's more. And maybe we'll have, I think, so we can get to everybody's questions, we'll maybe have one person on the panel answer. And then, does that sound good? We'll start with you.
Okay, great. A lot of pressure. Thank you so much for a wonderful panel, especially addressing the different positionalities that we all approach both climate activism and environmental activism through. Recognizing that everyone brings a different skill set and has different privileges to do certain things, but are often looking for inspiration from people like yourselves. What's like a soundbite that you might give someone if they were wondering, what can I do today and 10 years from now?
And then could we also pass to you two? And then if you all could answer your question, if someone on the panel is like, that one's for me, let me know. And then
Join
we'll
an
hear the other
organization.
two.
Join, because by yourself you cannot do anything. Join, identify a group of Hellraiser and join them.
Absolutely.
Yes, you talked about, you brought up ancestors, and I just want to ask the panel, or somebody on the panel, the use of indigenous knowledge, because of the systems approach. We need transformational change right now, and where can indigenous knowledge and a systems approach be effective, and maybe it's not effective in some other places?
Well, there's this concept in many Latin American countries called Pachamama, which is basically living with the whole. And it's the idea that we are part of the ecosystem of nature, and our way of relating to Mother Earth has to be in this reciprocal way, where we not only take but give back. And that, for me, has looked like giving back in ceremony, giving back in prayer. And it's the little things where you make that intentional connection. If you think of the different ways in which conservation has taken place around the world, there are some places where an area is protected and people are kicked out of there, because there is this concept that humans cannot coexist with nature versus indigenous stewardship of making ecosystems thrive because you understand them. In Mexico, our identity is maize, corn, and it is a plant that was domesticated by humans because we understood how to have that balance and that harmony. Visually, we are right now in an exponential, ever-growing pathway of more everything, more wealth disparity, more consumerism, more waste, more production. The indigenous way of looking at things is in circularity. It's in, I like to see it as a spiral going up, because we're not just stationary. We are actually evolving. My dad says that we are in a medium-low level of consciousness, and we need to, in order to raise that consciousness, we need to ground ourselves in knowledge. We need to ground ourselves in that ancestral wisdom. Something that we do in indigenous communities is youth and elder circles with elders teach youth wisdom. And this is a very professional way of doing the same thing, but it is so important because youth are closest to the beginning of life. We have eyes and we're seeing the world in ways that people with more experience in life aren't seeing the world in that way. It's so, we cannot even explain why nature is so fascinating, why you feel so connected when you put your feet in the water, why you feel so connected when you look up in the sky and a butterfly flies by. But also, I don't know all of the history of my people just by being born. I don't know the history of civil disobedience. I don't know all of the fighting that had to happen in order for us to still exist and be able to practice our worldview today. So if you want to know more about Pachamama, I can give you an article to read after this. If everybody here probably loves articles. And just saying that all of us have that inside of us. We have the ability to make that connection and be servants of life. Because indigenous peoples right now, they're protectors of life, but we shouldn't protect something if there wasn't a danger. And so connecting with that reason of who we are, why we're here to protect Mother Earth and to learn from her.
That's good.
And then we're just going to do 2 ending questions. So you, and then, This is a hard choice.
that's
Okay, we'll
exciting.
also be here. We'll be around, yeah. We'll talk to you both.
So thank you all for being here today. I'm a high school biology teacher, and this is a question that comes from one of my classes. When I talk to them about the environmental crisis, I'm always inspired by how they respond very optimistically about it, despite it being pretty sad information. And they view things under the context of passing and failing classes. So they say it's very obvious that in the past we've failed our environment and things are going bad. But if all of you were to project 70 years into the future, what would have to be accomplished for you to say, okay, this is a passing grade, this is progress, whether it be policy, whether it be some change in the world, what's something that you can give my students as a goal to work towards in their future?
You want an answer? You really want an answer? Is this working? Yeah.
It's working.
Yeah, there are a number of things. One of them is if we are able to close the high seas to fishing. Because you see, we have a global ocean. We have management systems that are relatively good within country waters, and that's how fisheries are managed by national level, right? So imagine you seal off that part, then we can concentrate on managing our EEZs, and if we do it well, we will achieve infinity fish, my young man. So that is one of the things, and I know there are many other things colleagues can say. Yeah, just one.
And on that note, I think so.
At least 15 minutes left.
Oh, thank God. Okay, so we're gonna go back to the blue. Can we go to the blue
Let's
shirt
finish
in
the
the
report
back?
card then.
We're gonna do blue shirt in the back. He's had a question for quite some time. Can we pass him the mic and then we'll come right back to you?
How y'all doing today? I'm a computer science major. I specialize in cybersecurity, but I'm also a solar energy consultant. And my question is, like here on April the 14th, they changed the law that made the cost of solar kind of go. It made it go up. As you know, that when you're dealing with solar, the whole infrastructure is still controlled by the electric companies. So with these big electric companies controlling, everything, and actually when they passed this law, they had a private voting, and the public wasn't involved. So these big companies were able to do the voting themselves, which made the price go up. How can we disrupt those kind of markets when it's being controlled like that?
Yeah. I do some work in this field in Hawaii now. So we have thank you for your question. Yeah, we have a really similar problem. A lot of the utilities in the United States are set up under legacy systems where they're often monopolies, regulated monopolies, pretty close to it. And they sort of get to be the good guys no matter what they're doing because they're the folks who keep the lights on, right? Whether they're actually doing that or not. And yes, they can be really hard to penetrate. I think that it's really great that you're working in the solar industry. Some of the things that we kind of have to fight for are like energy sovereignty and democracy. And so like what that means to unpack it is like the ability for communities and even households to control their own energy and to kind of get off of the grid. And in some places there have been policies that have been supportive of that, but actually as solar has advanced, places like California and Hawaii are starting to pull some of those policies back because they're like, you're doing too well. And they'll blame, they'll say, oh, the solar people are going to shut your lights off, and they'll kind of pit everyone against each other. The one good thing that I'll say about it is in the federal laws that passed last year, there's actually a lot of incentives and opportunities to reduce the cost of that for low-income communities, particularly. And right now, people are kind of figuring out how this is all going to play out and what institutions are going to get set up to finance those transitions in communities. but even at the household level, people can start taking advantage of that right now. So I would encourage folks to educate yourselves about some of those policy opportunities. There are a few good resources out there. Rewiringamerica.org, Block Power have some good things. Federal government even has some at cleanenergy.gov. While I have the mic, I'll also say, don't do things on your own. I agree that the best advice is to join an organization. So I want to shout out Sunrise Movement LA, which is doing really incredible work at the intersection of fighting oil extraction and housing and clean energy. And some of the folks are here in the audience right now, Nico and Josiah. So talk to them if you want to get involved and do stuff in community as well.
And I'll just share super briefly, thank you, super briefly. The governor right now is going through the May revise coming up, and so there's a lot of conversation about budget allocation, and a big part of that is around energy. So if you do join a group and you all are considering taking an action, one action is to send a direct letter to the governor's office about the funding support that you think certain projects need.
Hello. As advertised, my name is Nico. I'm with the Sunrise Movement Los Angeles. Core to our work is engaging and organizing alongside frontline communities, in particular in Watts and along the LA City oil field. But as we engage with our work, it's important to recognize that the broader climate movement is certainly not immune from the impacts of white supremacy, of settler colonialism, and patriarchy, both here in the U.S. and across the world. What can our organizations and our movements do to better center the experiences of Black and Brown working class communities, of indigenous communities, and put those closest to the harm, closest to the power?
How do we do that? Yeah, you probably have an answer for that, do you?
Or do you want to answer? Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much. So I would say right now, we as a society in the U.S. love to be very solution-oriented, so love to be very, here's the problem, here's the exact solution, even if you really didn't spend that much time navigating the problem. And especially as that relates to thinking about solutions and kind of picking slight adjustments instead of transformational change. And I think a good example of that is related to transportation. We'll just put electric cars instead of completely rethinking how we think of transportation in this country or in this city. And so as it relates to leaning in and putting people who are most experiencing harm at the forefront of decision making, it requires trust, it requires time, and it requires listening. And I think, and working with organizations that are already on the ground doing that. My organization, Black Women for Wellness, there's a lot of other really incredible EJ groups in LA, Pacoima Beautiful, East Yards Communities, Communities for a Better Environment, so many others. And I know you all know them because they get protests, yeah. So I think really spending time with the people who are members in those organizations and spending time really understanding the problem and any externalities that could be created from solutions that are being passed at whether the policy level, statewide or locally, and asking, and I'm constantly asking myself questions like, are all of the right people at the table for this conversation that we're having around whatever policy? Am I the right person to be leading this discussion, or should I be in more of a supportive function? What externalities, what might come from this thing that we're pushing? Are they able to, is it so important that we need to figure out mitigation strategies, or what other things do we need to be considering? And a good example of that right now, I work alongside Stand Los Angeles to eliminate neighborhood oil drilling in LA, and a huge conversation we're having right now is around remediation of sites, and also thinking about displacement, anti-displacement and gentrification, which is that so many times in the US you have these groups that do great work and communities fight hard and long to get rid of something that's harming their homes, harming their families, and it goes away. And then suddenly the community has this huge gentrifying force come in, and then the people who fought for change are not the ones that get to experience it, and that is insane. And so in all of these plans, we have to be thinking about anti-displacement very early on and figuring out answers to these questions very early on, so that the people who actually fought for the change and deserve it are actually the ones that get to experience it. So just a couple notes. Thanks.
Okay, I think, oh yeah, we got the mic.
Hi everyone. It was so wonderful to hear all of your perspectives. Just to do a quick introduction, my name is Abira. I've talked with some of you, but I am one of the other Tyler Prize ambassadors this year and currently an environmental science student at USC. So my question is going to be a lot more broad than some of the previous questions. So we've kind of heard from your discussion, there's like a lot of different approaches to solving the climate crisis. So my question is, like, do you all have some strategies that you think are best used to find those optimal solutions, the solutions that you think will work best?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and it resonates to the approach that I mentioned we do at Roots and Shoots, the KCA. So number one is recognizing that climate change does not impact everywhere homogeneously. That is number one. Number two is we have to also recognize that there is potential multiple interventions. So the first part is this KCA methodology is doing the mapping of your environment. So mapping in terms of understanding the challenges and also opportunities. And so that will narrow down to what is very specific to your own environment and area. And then that will also, some light will come out of that as to what exactly would happen to very exact specific solutions. So I would say, at a very basic level, number one is having that understanding, educating yourself about what's happening around you and what could be the potential solution. And of course, to join my colleagues, the next step would be involving everyone, because if it's everyone's problem, it's gonna need everyone to solve that kind of problem. So joining people who are like-minded, who would want to do some good cause into it.
Oh, Daniel.
Oh,
yeah.
So it's obvious that diminishing or reducing greenhouse gas emission will not be achieved by a single sector, though the fossil fuel industry would be a good one to start with, agriculture and everything. In fisheries, the fisheries, by our count, is producing 1%, 2% of greenhouse gas emission. It's nothing compared to the whole lot, but it's a hell of a lot of greenhouse gases.
Relatively, yeah.
So, and what is really annoying about fisheries is that we would have a higher catch with fewer boats and less emission. In contrast to the airplane industry, they have to burn fuel to transport people. In fishing, if they fish less, they would catch more actually, because the curve is not always ascending. So, in our sector, fighting for against subsidies, which Rashid will tell us about, that enable boats that are marginal to continue operating, is actually fighting for the climate change, because they burn lots of fuel. And they also, the trawlers, liberate or free lots of sediment. We spent lots of sediment that contain carbon that was buried, and it's brought back into the water column and hence in the atmosphere. So reducing fisheries, and I think that lots of sectors, if they improve themselves, they improve their act, they would also reduce emission. For example, the cattle sector, if they had some algae in the food, I've read somewhere they put some algae in the food, reduce the greenhouse gas methane emission from the other end, and the cattle is doing better, and the methane is not produced. So every sector will have to contribute, because the greenhouse gas emission, excessive greenhouse emission, are the sum total of all the sectors.
Yeah. Oh.
I think we've got
Leah, can I just say something? There's something concrete happening live as we are talking, Yesterday, Amber, where are you? It's good you gave us a free evening, right? So one of the things I did with my evening was trying to cook up a project. It's a new project. And it's supported, Canada Research Council started this in collaboration with 8 other countries, including South Africa, the UK, and they are putting together some money to help researchers to form teams that will then create some concrete action to adapt to climate change in vulnerable communities. So this is really touching on barriers and all that. And our project idea, just beginning, is to, all these big international agreements, there were 4 of them in the last 12 months or so, they all have funding components. So what we're putting together is a team of people to pick the Gulf of Guinea in South Africa, the Benguela in South Africa, to come together and find a way to make the people there in the coast understand what these monies are, how much they're there, how they can access it, and with them they lead the charge, we design adaptation schemes for them such that these monies can come down to the people at the coast to really do something to protect nature and protect their livelihood. So that's one concrete example for you there. Yeah, thank you.
And I think we only have time for one more question. So yeah, let's get into it.
I have a question for the laureates. I just want to know, at what point in your career did you realize that your research was putting you in a position to become kind of a steward for natural resources for future generations?
Yeah. I want to, you ask. It's a tough question, Husky. Come on. Yeah. So at what point? I think reflecting back. I like going back to my granddad because he had a big impact years after when I realized the impact of what he was saying. We'll be playing soccer and we are football for Europeans and Africans and others is football, right? Soccer for the US, and we are hitting the wall and jumping, having fun. This was one of the moments he told us, come on guys, walk on earth as if it feels pain. And I think years after when I reflect, I said, this is sophisticated environmentalism. I better stop the engineer. My first degree is engineer. I was supposed to be building houses for you. I found that to be boring, right? So go out and really work to protect nature. So yeah, I think it started early. Daniel, over to you, sir.
Well, it's like when you become a parent, all of a sudden these kids expect you to be a father, and you never learned that, right? So you learn on the job. And when I moved from the Philippines to Canada, I had experience in developing countries or in the global south. The same situation, which is the science, stock assessment, fishery science is being done, but decisions are being taken about buying boats that by ministers that are corrupt, and the boats are not needed or they will be destroying the resource, that are completely independent of the research that is being done. There's no relationship. And I thought it was a plague of developing countries. And I got to Canada, where Canada had just destroyed the biggest stock of fish in the world with the best science in the world. We were looking, fishery scientists were looking to Canada the same way that we look at Canada from Switzerland or Europe, hockey players. They were the champion, way above everybody else. And it was all a fraud. Canada had no idea how to regulate its fisheries, the fishery for cod. A fishery that had existed 500 years was devastated in 3 decades by uncontrolled fishing by huge trawlers. And I know that because I was a student in Germany on the German trawlers in '73 on the Grand Bank. And so they had no idea what's happening. They let them operate. And when it became too much, they decided, we're going to kick the foreigner out, and then we're going to build a fleet, Canadian fleet, that continues what they did. They annihilated the stock of 200 million tons, yes, and that produced about 200,000 tons per year, reduced to 5,000 tons per year. So more than 100 times less. That was the best fisheries in the world, the best managed fisheries. It was all a fraud. And I discovered that there is nothing, no relationship between the research that was done and the intervention of the government. I discovered that it was the same thing as in the developing world. And I discovered that as a scientist, I could do something only by associating myself with an NGO community. Without it, I had no leverage, because you publish papers and nobody cares. So I became very, very involved with NGOs, and I'm now in the board of a big NGO that called Oceana, and I can do policy through Oceana. I can influence policy as a scientist through Oceana. I could not do it myself. But there is no way otherwise for scientists to influence, unless you are Einstein or something and you could write to the president, but to influence policy, we have to associate ourselves with a group that is powerful enough to shake up the system. Otherwise, the science itself stays in the papers. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Let's give it up for our panelists. Some of us will be around if anyone had any additional questions, but I wanted to say thank you to you all as well. It's Friday, and you all are here. Thank you so much. There's also food boxes in the back. You can meet me back there. And have a good rest of your Friday, everybody.
So you mentioned the book that you have done.
Yeah.